Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are joining us from. And welcome to this new talk from a special edition of KnowTalks held as part of the Abu Dhabi International Book Fair 2022, and which is extending from the 23rd of May up till the 29th of May with daily sessions from 12 to 1 p.m. Abu Dhabi time. I am pleased to have with me Mr. Ivano today to speak about ESG. However, before we start, allow me with some housekeeping. I have three things. First of all, for the interpretation, the event the talk will fully be held in English. However, interpretation into Arabic is available and can be accessed through the interpretation globe at the bottom of your screens. Allow me to say this in Arabic. الجلسة مقدمة باللغة الإنجليزية ولكن الترجمة الفورية متاحة ويمكنكم التك على زر الترجمة لتفعيلها. The second housekeeping remark is regarding the questions. So please keep your questions in the Q&A box, and I will be asking them in the Q&A segment. And a third remark, there will be certificates of attendance that will be sent to you by email within a week time. So let's start. Our talk today is about sustainability in the private sector. With consumers nowadays aligning with, like, they are choosing the companies that align with their values. What are companies? What is the private sector doing for that? What is ESG? Like, how does it differ from CSR, for example? I'm happy to have you with us, Ivano Iannelli. You are one of the most acknowledged GCC experts in the fields of sustainability and carbon emission management. You are a board director of the Esg Foundation and former CEO of the Dubai Carbon and United Nations senior official before that. So I know, Ivano, that you have prepared for us a presentation. And let me tell you, I have checked this presentation this morning, and this is a mini course about ESG. So please listen carefully, because this is very important. And yes, Ivano. Please.
Thank you, Stephanie. No, it's a pleasure. It's a little bit noisy, so hopefully you can hear us well. But essentially, I wanted to set the scene, to see exactly where we're heading, and obviously your questions will make my day. So let me give you a quick overview. What I prepared is the transition. So what is ESG vis-a-vis sustainability? And let me start with the fact that the ESG is essentially a more systematic framework for sustainability. We've had CSR in the past, corporate social responsibility, but for some unknown reason, it has become more marketing centric, more rather than business centric. So the decisions were fostered around the impact it would have on the marketing side and not on the business side as well. Why do I emphasize the business side? Is because in the specific realm of sustainability, we want activities which are successful to be scalable and replicable. We don't want just to show off and attach a sustainable label to just about everything. We want to transition from the unsustainable resource consumption patterns that we are experiencing to something more reasonable that takes into account the preciousness of the resources, as well as takes into account the social and governance alongside with it. So why we engage in this? Well, companies with a strong ESG foundation tend to perform better. They are more inclusive, they're more transparent, they're more resilient. So when you look at periods like we've been experiencing for the past 2 years, the ability to help multicultural environments, inclusive, creates also more dynamic choices and suggestion to the business environment itself. And again, the last 2 years have challenged everyone in ways that we were not prepared for. And I can tell you for a fact that no risk metrics would have accounted for such a pandemic. And we're seeing a very strong participation from the private sector. What this means is that not only we have an ongoing movement for net zero emissions, only the E of the three-letter acronym, but we also see how these bold aspirations are becoming more, they're closer in time to us. So we're looking at companies taking more profound approaches towards their 2030 targets. And the key word here is targets, because targets allow everyone to measure the progress. Now, where do we stand? In the UAE, we did recently launch a 2050 strategic initiative for net zero. This was run across all departments, both public and private, in October of last year. And it was set up like a government accelerator. So it was very participatory in nature. It was quite long in time, but very exhaustive. We looked at all the sectors that needed to decarbonize. We brought in all the players. Well, I was brought in, so I wasn't the one bringing them in, but collectively, we assessed each other's value chains. We assessed our own emissions, and we were looking at ways to create this 2050 target a reality. This has cascaded down to a number of thematic areas and initiatives within. So as you can see, it's a very analytical framework that is being implemented. And this is also the major difference from a CSR to an ESG platform. What we have is not just community engagement, which is one of the building blocks within the ESG framework, but we have a lot more business-centric approaches that look at patterns, how you utilize your resources, mitigate those, look at your emission, you look at your boards and committees, and facilitates the development going forward. But why is this happening now? Why is this movement towards net zero so strong? Essentially, the Paris Agreement formally kicked off on January 1st of last year. These are your governments that have signed up and have started the implementation of the famous 2015 Paris Agreement signed, where emissions must be reduced by 2050 to avoid dangerous climatic conditions. And again, as we are talking today, there are heat waves that were not expected in parts of Asia. In the Middle East, we've had a week of sandstorms, and it's very likely that condition will worsen over time. Yet again, we are moving in the right direction. The agreement set the stage for targets to cascade down from government to private sector, from private sector to the individual. And again, we've seen also a lot of legislation come into place that probably 10 years ago, it wouldn't have made its way. One of these is the European Union Green Deal. And within this framework, there is a piece of legislation called CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which requires international importers in specific categories like cement, fertilizers, energy, aluminum, and steel to cover the cost of the embedded emissions of their imports. Now, if you recall, in 2012, the European Union attempted to have a similar framework for the aviation, which was fiercely battled against. And it was not for the emissions, but it was just not the right time to involve a global framework. Now we have Paris Agreement setting the scene, all countries looking at ways to comply at a national, regional, and international level. And outcome is more collectively in the right direction, is more collegiate in its approach, and it looks at ways to improve both the assets, but also our patterns. In reality, products are changing. So we do have a lot of industries, automotive, consumer, that are trying to comply with both national legislation, but also the interest of their own stakeholders. So all of a sudden, these products are better products, are more resource efficient, and best of all, they comply with this ambition for a net zero. But going back, we were talking about ESG. How is this working exactly? And what I wish people to understand is that we are always constantly being evaluated about our ESG performance. Now, if I were a company, I might be already receiving ratings and scoring from ESG auditors without my knowledge. This is because obviously there might be people interested in investing in my company. There might be people interested in my product, my competitors, my clients. And what they would do, they would hire firms to assess the company performance on ESG on publicly available data. Why would they do that? Well, first and foremost, just to stress test a company's ability to last longer than a few years. So imagine now we have all this climate legislation, but we have additional pieces of legislation that I will show you in just a couple of slides that focus also on the social and governance side. And they just want to make sure that your company, your entity, your body, your service is capable of respecting, of aligning to the changing environment the business is experiencing. ESG metrics is mainstream already. The financial sector has embraced it and it's pushing for it very hard. It's by far not a perfect system as of now, but it's quickly evolving and embracing new strategies, new approaches. But just like exchanges, just like bodies like MSCI, Sustainalytics, there is a framework in place that assigns weighted average to very specific elements of ESG scoring. And again, if you look at it, it would be a report similar to this with elements of your risk assessment, your compliance, your controversy. And all it states is the ability of a company based on public disclosed information to endure the environment it operates within. Essentially, the concept of sustainability in the long run. And globally, the market is evolving. So we see the trends that Europe started being replicated across the US. We see stock exchanges and other platforms organizing themselves to create, improve on the ESG metrics, creating a more publicly available standard of disclosures. We see new bodies like the ISSB, a standard body for sustainability being created by the IFRS, which is the standard that has been looking at our financial statements for the last few decades. But we also have a lot of new carbon markets emerging. We have a lot of more cooperation among different areas of the world. The Green Deal, well, this has been a success for Europe, especially in a climate like today's, where the energy mix has to substantially change within a relatively short time. The Green Deal was not meant to finance this shift in their energy mix to renewable intensive and clean energy intensive requirements, but it does help the European Union to fulfill its mission because it's a way to gather funding for relevant projects in a relatively short time. But it also instigates the private sector to build a more resilient company an investment strategy alongside those same platforms. And if we look at Green Deal, it's quite wide, quite ambitious. It's also quite diverse. So it doesn't focus only on carbon markets, but it focuses on disclosure, on finance, on transportations. But again, the only reason I'm bringing this up is because the Green Deal has had a cascading effect internationally on a number of industries, segment topics, and so forth, so on. One of which is the fact that disclosures have geared up to be more alongside the requirements of a policy, of legislation. So if companies do not properly disclose or do not properly look after their social and governance, there will be a framework that addresses that in the legislation, in the regulation. What this means is elements that are taken, that are publicly stated, should reflect reality. These are the basis of dealings with European Union. And obviously, if a company is not in a position to disclose or to treat its workforce along the standards required, they can either not deal with Europe or they need to increase their capacity. This, in its effect, will also cascade down to the SMEs, which are the building blocks of every country participating with the larger companies in these transactions. And again, we've had a number of them ranging from several decades ago to the most recent ones, which it's very well known as the Task Force on Disclosures that was created for the purpose of this. We also have, obviously on the E side, different standards that come into play, but very rarely people know the difference between one and another. So take, for example, SBTI, the Science-Based Target Initiative, is probably the most common standard today to achieve net zero. This is a framework to align your entity, public or private, to the 1.5 degree scenario. And under this standard, for example, no offsets are considered. The only offset that can be taken into account is for non-existential emissions, so those that cannot be abated, from nature-based removals. We have the net zero standard, which allows for specific assets, environmental assets, to be used. We have carbon neutral, which does allow for specific offsets to be used. We have carbon negative. We wish we could achieve that in every business, which actually goes above and beyond the zero, but creates a further improvement by not using any offsets. And the last one, which is carbon free, which is eventually where we'll all be in the post-2050 scenario. But how do we build an ESG framework? Well, it is a blueprint. It's collaborative across the entire organization. And we have to be the conduit of our stakeholders within our own operating environment. And again, this diagram is just illustrative, but it gives you a feel. And what is important here is to set goals which are far-reaching, that are ambitious, that span over longer periods of time. What is relevant to say is that we shouldn't be concerned about having a negative result today. We should be concerned about not being able to achieve a better result tomorrow. So starting off with your performance today does not have to be a taboo, but rather a work in progress. This is what at all levels, investment, legislators, regulators want to see a line that slopes down. They don't want to see definitely a line going up, but also a flat line does not really provide any value to anyone. We are looking for the success stories in every segment that can be replicated across other industries and geographies. And most important is to track progress, to see exactly how well you perform or not perform within a specific KPI. You might do very well in the social, but it might be slow in the environment. That is not necessarily a bad thing. There is a lot of analysis that will go through that to facilitate improvements over time. There is also technology maturing that complements specific areas. But whatever is important is to keep track of this performance, of these KPIs, and building the story going forward. Now, this is very small, doubt anyone will be able to look at it, but it's just to give you a sense of how an ESG scoring metrics would look like. You would have probably 10 to 20, if not more, material indexes, and each one of them will be broken down into subcategories. Each one of them will be given a weighted average and a score. And this is how you build your framework, looking at those that you can quickly improve, looking at those that might take a while to improve, and building the pathway going ahead. And it's very collaborative, very creative. At the end of the day, your supply chain, your clientele, your catchment area, your shareholders will all be involved. It does require funding, but the way I always found is that there is always available funding for good projects. It's the bad projects that nobody wants to finance. And as long as we can demonstrate the value to the business, the value to society, to the stakeholders, nobody will ever be shy in approving a long-term strategy that makes the business and its environment thrive. Well, Stephanie, I hope I met your expectations.
You certainly did, Ivano, in a record time with all these slides and rich info. Thank you so much. I just have a question regarding the slide with the matrix, you know, with the net zero, the neutral, the free, carbon free and carbon negative. Yes. What's carbon free?
Carbon free means that there is no carbon in the entire value chain. So essentially, those are categories, nomenclatures that have been created. Let's call them labels to allow the individual to understand exactly what you're dealing with. So, for example, there is a lot of press around oil companies pursuing carbon neutral activities. What it really means to a practitioner is that they are using offsets. What the consumer might comprehend is different. And this is where the gap lies. Unfortunately, oil companies, like many other industries, do have existential emissions. It means you cannot remove those emissions. But let's also think for a second. It's easy to point the finger and say, oh, big bad wolf. But why are those companies taking oil from the ground? Why are those emissions being generated? It's because us, as end users, are asking for it. So it's very easy to say, oh, the oil companies are bad, they should fix it. But at the same time, we'll take a big gas guzzler and drive it down the street to buy a loaf of bread. So obviously, it's a balance between supply and demand. Especially in power and utilities, we've run numerous projects trying to balance, to decrease the demand of electricity, because it's one of those resources which are taken for granted. So we just plug something into the wall, and we do not think that because of that machine, because we plug in bigger fridge, or because we start adding an extra television set or leave the AC running while we're not there, someone at the other end of the plug must be producing that electricity using fossil fuel. Now, in certain environments, we're lucky, we're very efficient. The UAE produces power at very efficient levels. In others, they're still producing using coal. So what is important is to look both inside ourselves, how we interact with the resources that we've been given, but also do our part in trying to stimulate a private sector community of resource efficiency.
Great, thanks. In your presentation, you focused on the E side of ESG. I understand the repercussions on the E of the E on the S and the G. However, is the environmental part the most important here, or?
From an ESG standpoint, absolutely not. It is, however, my area of expertise, and I do tend to fall into the trap all the time. So it is mostly my fault. I'm very passionate about this. And again, what I also wish to share is the fact that I'm not an environmentalist. So I'm not there measuring the air quality, but as a development economist, my focus is on resources, on transactions, on creating, on doing the same, using less resources, more efficiently and more qualitatively. But the S and the G do need equal consideration.
Thank you. I could feel the passion anyway. One of your slides caught me the most. It's the one where you say, it is not what you do, but what you omit to disclose that counts. So here there's a problem with data provision. In your opinion, like what are the metrics or figures that companies don't want to disclose?
Well, we have a tendency, and this is just natural, not to broadcast what we're not good at. And this is absolutely normal, it's human nature. So the quick and simple answer is companies do not disclose those KPIs which are not performing well. So obviously, if I was a company, a startup, I would not want to disclose the fact that my cash flow is awful. Or if I were, in other segments, I might be a more, I don't know, male-dominated business. I might not want to disclose my gender balance figures. And this is where companies are completely wrong. Because obviously, once you are aware of that problem, you will constantly pursue a remedy. And this is what the outside world should be seeing. Not you saying how good you are in something specific, but opening transparently your entity to disclose where you want to improve and how you wish to do that. And you will see a larger intake of your stakeholders within your within the respective areas.
And that, as you have mentioned before, like I think companies can be caught, as you have said, that other companies will do their job. They will show their numbers. They will show us where they are where these companies are in their ESG pathways.
Correct. It's not something. And again, this is the difference between just issuing a sustainability report and engaging in real ESG work. So take someone like me that has seen hundreds, thousands of reports. For me, when I open it, I can see immediately what has been omitted, what is not performing, what is better, what is worse, simply because I've seen this data over and over again. I've seen it splashed in red, green, yellow, blue. I've seen it at the end, at the front. So there are many practices that are used. But at the end of the day, we all know each other. Like, I would know my neighbor because I constantly monitor him. Like I would know my competitor because obviously I constantly monitor him. So it's very easy for someone within your same industry to identify these gaps and use them against you. And this is one of the reasons why whatever the KPI is, and no matter how bad it is, it's better to disclose it and over time pursue a strategy to improve it rather than keeping it within your books, hidden behind closed doors.
Yeah. How can we encourage companies to report? I know it is a win-win situation, but how can they be aware of this?
Well, one of the things that I've noticed recently is if you disclose, people will take your data. If you don't disclose, they might guess. And that guess 9 out of 10 times is wrong, and it's not in your favor. So this is one of the first elements. It's literally in your risk matrix, one of the strategies to mitigate wrongful assumptions from third parties. But also what is relevant to say, and going back to the previous question, now companies can proactively pursue different strategy using regulators and legislation. For example, the Green Deal framework in Europe might actually punish international companies that do not comply with labor policies. And again, take large companies, for example, with humongous workforces. Some of this work might be outsourced to third parties. And these third parties may claim they do everything right, but nevertheless, we don't really have the certainty unless we go and check on a regular basis. And this is one of the important points. I might be liable for a big, big fine in Europe if one of my competitors would identify this as a gap, as a problem, as an issue. So in order to avoid this, we do seek the widest transparency and disclosures across all the segments.
One of the main differences between CSR, corporate social responsibility, and ESG is perhaps that CSR is more soft and fluffy, but ESG is more serious. It is like, it's got targets, it's way different. What are other differences that you can tell us of? And do you think that CSR is from the past and it should remain there or?
I actually think they work well together. And again, it's just a matter of evolution. And again, CSR, sustainability, ESG, they're all based on the same indicators. They've not changed. And if we look, everything is benchmarkable to the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative. So they're not really different. It's just how we intend to use them. CSR has always been seen as more of a community engagement tool, which is perfect. It does add value, but CSR alone does not justify a business increasing its budget unless I can prove that it's of advantage to my shareholders. And this is where the more analytical, the more structured ESG framework comes into play.
Great. Are there any available tools like software, maybe a portal for companies to to support companies in their ESG journeys?
There is a lot of tools, both free and paid, available to everyone. On the ESG side, there are standards, there are frameworks which are widely available, completely free of charge, such as even B Corp certification. Or if you look at the ESG Foundation, we do map some of these tools and we try to act as a compendium of ESG reports across the globe. This is specifically done to allow the end user, for example, to be able to compare his industry against its peers, to see the report of a similar entity and try to ascertain where the value might be derived.
I will start with questions from the audience, and you have got many. And also for the audience present here, please let me know if you have any questions. So to what extent is the principle of participatory social responsibility applied to preserve the environment among the various actors, companies, individuals, civil society, organizations?
Well, you see, it's environment-based. It takes the lion's share. There are two obvious strategies here, the carrot and the stick. So now we see some elements of regulation and legislation making its way. The participatory side, it's on the carrot side. So it's an incentive for private sector to start early, to be early adopters of ESG strategies, transparent disclosures, to allow those, how can I say, this creative, this new approach to make its way. Usually, and this is very well rooted in large multinationals, the company culture is adverse to change. So you might have 5, 10 decision points before a new idea might make its way to the right ear. And it's shortening these gaps that allows the participatory approach, that allows the right person to hear the right idea and align it to the standard.
A question related to COVID-19. So do you think that the pandemic has served the sustainability more than governments did?
The pandemic is getting us out of the comfort zone. It's done some good, it's done some bad. It forced us to embrace tools that might have not made its way as quickly into society. The fact that we're having this webinar now over the internet means that many of you did not fly in for the event, did not drive to the venue, did not use resources that would have been otherwise commonly before then. I do not think that government should be looked in any other way than supporting us. And again, for UAE residents, it was a very marginal change from where we were before. We were already at the forefront of digitalization, of ensuring that the journey for public and private services was streamlined on specific patterns. And when COVID hit, it was easier to implement specific regimes vis-a-vis other countries. For example, I'm Italian, I still find it hard to pay for services online, where this has been present here for so many years, and it's considered pretty much business as usual.
You told me that I could ask you anything, so I'll be the devil's advocate here. One time I was on my way to Expo, and I was with the taxi driver, and he was telling me. So I was telling him that I wanted to be dropped at the sustainability pavilion. So he told me. So he went on telling me about the net zero emissions and what he thinks about it, and he told me that he thinks that this is something that was created by developed countries for developing countries not to develop. So developed countries have developed, and now they are saying, okay, we are going to be net zero. I don't believe in this, but I'd like to know your answer.
Well, it does have a resemblance to some of the discussions that we have also at the negotiations. And it's rooted in the fact that many developing countries see the opulence as comfort. And as such, they wish to achieve that. And they say, oh, net zero is because they don't want us to have it. Now, again, we are unable to change the past. Point is, whatever opulence it's perceived as comfort is not going to get us where we need to be. And as such, we can have growth and development in these countries faster than developed countries because there is no baggage, there is no hurdles. All we need to create is the framework that accommodates. Let's also look just where we sit. The greatest success of this millennium has been the Middle East. At the turn of the century, this region was not as popular as it is today. I mean, I came here 20 years ago, and I do not recall all this lifestyle, all these tall buildings. This is not unachievable for others. The leadership of the country created a framework which was several decades long as strategies is concerned, and looking at ways to attract the interest of the international community. What is blocking other developing countries from doing the same?
Thank you. Can MSMEs keep up with the ESG targets and demands?
Absolutely. This is why I started the Esg Foundation together with Clive. And the whole purpose was to create or provide access to free tools for the SMEs. Let's think that within any country, there is sort of a pyramid with SMEs being the largest number of companies within any possible geography. There will be obviously larger companies which have larger budgets, but quantity-wise, SMEs are the drivers of innovations. They are the ones that provide larger companies with the knowledge that they might not be able to pursue. I think the thing that I recall the most was in one of these early speeches, Bill Gates stated that Microsoft was not worried about the large software houses, but more about the two kids working out of a garage. And that created a bigger risk to a large entity like Microsoft than its direct competitors.
How do you develop a global approach to ESG? How to scale it from firm level to national, regional, and ideally global level?
I think this is exactly where we are today. There is a lot of focus on creating a synergy between the different indexes and ratings. What we need to do within the ESG industry itself is to have a more transparent approach on those weighted averages, trying to understand what drives what from where. And again, if you looked at the media, one of the biggest articles in the last couple of weeks has been the fact that a company like Tesla, it's outranked by a company like BP in the indexes. And obviously, to anyone, this might not make sense, but the index is there to evolve. Obviously, a company like BP might be doing fantastic on some of the indicators. A company like Tesla will do fantastic on other indicators. Nevertheless, the scoring is an average of all of them. So what needs to happen is that we are looking at ways to improve these methodologies more transparently, to be common, to be yet localized, and allow this comparability.
In the light of the movement to the path of low carbon economy, how can the companies build capacity both in terms of knowledge and human skills?
Well, I think knowledge is everywhere. I mean, as you said at the beginning, I was aiming for a mini course in ESG. What I personally feel is don't attempt to be a jack of all trades. Focus on one activity and do it well, and then move to the next one. So companies, especially SMEs, can start with their resource efficiency, can look at their governance, their boards, involve external parties if you do not have enough staff. There is a lot of talent out there willing to support this knowledge exchange for a simple title. They don't even need compensation. So along the same lines is just the collaborative approach I keep on stressing upon.
Back to the MSMEs. So this like one size fits all for the ESG. Is it one of its limitations?
No, because the framework is meant to fit different realities in different regions, in different thematic areas. So when you look at anything sustainability related, there is obviously the concept of materiality. Materiality means, is it material to my business? Is it material to my geography? So as an example, I was looking at materiality of water savings activities within the geography of the UAE. Now, the UAE has obviously does not have much water resources, and we desalinate most of the water. As a result, we are actually producing desalinated water that goes back into the aquifers and the water table itself. Now, as I said, I'm not an environmentalist, so my point is not the actual water cycle, but the fact that from a resource consumption pattern, desalinated water becomes available for a variety of processes. And to me, this is adaptation. Whereas in countries where water is readily available, the abuse of water should be scored differently than when there is an economic dimension to it, like here, that it has to be manufactured.
Right. Back to the human capital, especially like citizens, prior to the shift of like on the corporate side, like of corporate practices, for citizens, what are the soft and technical skills that are needed from them to pave the way for this shift?
I think there is a diversity of skill set. And again, I had a similar session a couple of weeks ago with Heriot Watts University, specific to the Center of Excellence for Smart Construction. And we were identifying exactly what are the skills of the future related to decarbonization. There is two elements of it. There is upskilling and there is new skills. So obviously we have new dimensions coming on, which range all the way from engineering to legal services. There is an old digital economy that's coming into play. And the way I see it, digital is able to take tiny little improvements and group them together into major efficiencies. From a legal side, we have to shift to learn more of those platforms where we can share efficiencies. One of these was a few years back, the introduction of energy performance contracts. When we do energy performance, we're basically allowing a third party to enter our business, to invest in our business and be repaid from the savings that occur. So just within the complexity of this statement, imagine how much legal work has to go in. Imagine how much training has to be provided to the end user to know exactly how to monitor and verify. And imagine all the sensors, all the digital, all the equipment that will be installed, maintained, provided. So just looking ahead, things like AI, platforms from a project management point of view, all the way to the economic measures, will all be upskilled to the new green economy.
But here, what guides what? Is it the production that guides the consumption or the consumption that guides the production?
But definitely is the demand that drives supply, because nobody will produce something that cannot be sold. So yes, we are to blame. Essentially, everything which is produced today is for our convenience. We need more power. They provide more power. We need bigger cars. We need more clothes. We need more food. The point is, do we really need it though? So there is a culture which has to undergo a pragmatic shift. There is, you know, I used to think my parents were incorrectly saying that they used to build them better a long time ago. But it is true. Now the concept of obsolescence is built in from day one. They want your phone to be obsolete within 12 months so that you would buy a new one. And look at our tendency to just wait eagerly for the new version of something to come out to showcase it. Now, this is the shift that needs to occur. We need to understand that resources are finite and our demands are not. So if you give us something, we want something plus more. And that plus more has to be produced, has to be built, has to be grown. And we need to balance our demand vis-a-vis our supply.
True, this is the human greed. But however, isn't there like a bit more responsibility on the supply side? You mentioned the mobile phones, for example. Like, we did not know what a mobile was. It's the companies. It was a bit top down on consumers, and they created in us this demand.
Well, when I go back to my textbooks, especially marketing, they would say that demand cannot be created, demand can only be captured. So if I'm not thirsty, you cannot provide me anything to drink. I would not fill that requirement. You can make it available for the time when that demand comes available. But again, it's very hard to pinpoint where we went wrong. The point being is disclosure, specifically in this case, are very, very valuable. Today, we produce equipment where we plan beforehand a critical breakage in excess of the product value in the manufacturing planning process, so that we already know when we can sell the next unit. This would be quite valuable to be disclosed. And even better would be the fact that I could sell this piece of equipment as a service. So if you know that this piece of equipment will only last 5 years, it might last 6 or maybe 4, then you as a service provider, as a manufacturer, should be able also to say, look, let's go into an agreement. You pay me this, I'll take it back, I'll recycle it into the value chain, and you will always enjoy a new product.
Here, let me end this with the golden definition of economics: allocating scarce resources to unlimited needs and wants. So this is it. I will end with one question. Like, we have been getting many similar questions to this one about technology. What is the role of technology? How can it support companies in their journeys, in their ESG journeys?
Well, technology is pivotal today. It allows us to compare, it allows us to benchmark, it allows us to identify patterns that we wouldn't normally know. And again, just as I was saying before, even within large industrial environments, we use technology to identify areas of improvements that might not be easily fulfilled in other conditions. Essentially, it would be too small of an improvement for me to undertake, but using technology, we might be able to aggregate it in a much larger opportunity. But technology is also the fact that we can have meetings across continents without having to fly a plane. And again, a few years back, I would find myself on a plane to go to a meeting in a different continent and come back after a day to go probably to another meeting a couple of days afterwards. Today, this has become taken for granted through the use of virtual meetings. And again, due to the pandemic, but nevertheless, it's how technology is adapting to our ever-changing requirement. And probably I want to make one last comment. We tend to say that change is difficult, that organization, people do not want to change. This is partially incorrect. I don't think anyone being given a big lump sum of free money would say, sorry, no, this is too big of a change for me. Change occurs in everything, but it's only when we lose comfort, when we lose benefits, that we are against change. So we need to try to identify the silver lining going forward to justify our shift from the proverbial comfort zone.
Change is the only constant. Thank you, Ivano. That was a great talk with you. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, our dear audience. So we wrap up today's KnowTalk, and we see you again tomorrow at 12 p.m. UAE time for a new KnowTalk about the future landscape of investment. One more remark before we close. So I would just wish to remind you that certificates will be sent to you by email, and also please don't forget to fill the survey and suggest future topics of interest. Thank you so much.
Thank you.